It's no secret that writing can be lonely work, but does it really have to be? Whether you're full-time, part-time, or just starting out, you'll get insights into the tricks, tips, and production habits of writers from every level of the biz. From best-selling authors to those launching their first novels, you're sure to be in the company of friends as we encourage great writers to divulge and share their secrets. This is the Great Writers Share podcast with your host, best-selling author, Daniel Wilcox.
Hello and welcome to episode number 75 of the Great Writers Share podcast, a show where every week we hijack an hour or so of time from some of the kindest and hardest working writers around today to join us on the show and discuss everything that makes them tick, roar and bounce. Today's date is Monday, the 15th of February, 2021 as of recording, and we'll dive straight into my personal update. So it's been a long, fun couple of weeks in and out of lockdown and looking after kiddo and all of the things. I'm currently behind on a bit of client work, which is never fun, but I'm working to get ahead on that. But I have had some fun this week. This week I have, in my fiction side of things, I have penned the first 1,000 words of a brand new novella, which I'm very excited about because I bought a cover back in, I want to say December, maybe November, just because the cover was beautiful and it made a bunch of ideas stir in my mind box. So I figured, buy it, give it a go, see where it leads, and finally I'm getting down to actually writing that book. And yeah, it's been a while since I've written something fictiony for me. I think the last fiction book I wrote was When Winter Comes, episode number 6 of that serial, and that was October or so. So yeah, about 4 or 5 months, and it just feels nice. It just feels nice getting fingers back to the keyboard, visiting a world, and just the unlimited possibilities of making something happen. So that is on its way. I have no idea when that's going to be released or what it's going to do. I don't know how big it's going to be yet. It's just a project that I'm just enjoying and having fun with. So I'll give you guys more information on that when I find out what the hell's going on. In non-fiction news, I am also chipping away at my productivity book. I think I mentioned last time I've now got a cover for it. I am working through the chapters, taking my time, just trying to get things right because there are some really good books out on the market for productivity, and I just want to make sure that I'm getting my spin and actually adding something different to the market as opposed to just regurgitating the same stuff in a slightly different way. So it's going well. I'm enjoying that as well. Lots of fun things going on at the minute. So yeah, just chipping away and getting that done. And this month, I'm also putting a lot of emphasis on promoting my coaching services, sort of throwing out some Facebook ads and different bits and pieces. My boot camp is growing, which is awesome. It's still ticking along, and that has people in there who just basically come in every week to get the words together. It's just an online writing group, and it's lots of fun. I've had a lot of fun running that over the past however many months it's been, and I'm also gearing up to launch the Camp Nano April month, in which I'll basically be doing a full hold you to account sessions in which if you want to tackle NaNoWriMo, if you want to do Camp NaNoWriMo, or I said Boot Camp NaNoWriMo then get involved. It'll be a lot of fun, and hopefully I can help push you towards finishing that first draft or wherever it is you want to get done during that month. Today's guest is sci-fi writer of A Spacetime Tale, which came out in December, Jay Benjamin. Jay was really, really fun to chat to. We went really, really deep into the weeds on some sort of geeky, sciencey stuff. We went a little bit into his background of coding and sort of the lessons that he learned there from failing and being able to move forwards. We talk about how to authentically include LGBTQ plus characters into your fiction. And we talk about networking with authors. So for anyone who's either interested in sci-fi, either interested in networking, either interested in getting your first book out, or just writing in general, then you're in the right place, because this is Great Writers Share, and this is going to be a fun one. But now, without any further ado, let's just dive into the interview with the one and only Mr. Jay Benjamin. Jay Benjamin is a sci-fi writer with a passion for space opera and aliens. He's been writing since the 7th grade. However, it wasn't until 2019 that he published his first novel, A Spacetime Tale. Jay's love for understanding the universe started as a kid, growing up in South Florida, watching the space shuttles take off from his backyard. He studied at the University of Arizona, which only deepened his curiosity for science. Jay loves to imagine what is possible. He looks at the universe, the pictures from the Hubble, and likes to believe there is something beyond them other than static photos of stars and nebulae. When not writing, Jay works in the tech industry. His passions include yoga, running, rowing, and Worms multiplayer. Burritos and Middle Eastern are his go-to cuisines. Joel, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Daniel. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, and I've already had the slip. We spoke a little bit before as whether I call you Jay or Joel or what, and I went from Jay in the beginning, and I've already thrown a Joel out there. So we'll throw it around. It's fine. It works.
Yeah.
Tell me, so in your intro, obviously, there's a lot of very, very important stuff there, very, very interesting stuff about science, about space, about the wonders of the universe. What is it about Worms multiplayer that gets you fired up?
Oh man, that game is just so addicting. I've been playing it since I think Worms Armageddon on the N64.
Nice.
And I don't know, those little things crawling across the screens, talking in their little squeaky voices, and then firing weapons at each other. It's such a stupid but addicting game, and it's a strategy game, and you have to like plan all your moves strategically, and that's kind of what I love about it. But at the same time, it's not very serious, kind of like me. So I feel like, I feel like that game is kind of like a allegory to my life.
I love it. And have you got involved in sort of like the online side of it, or is it sort of just your general flat local at the minute?
I'm not one of those people who's like really hardcore, like, going into forums and like talking to like other gamers. But, I know other people, a few friends of mine who play the game, and occasionally we'll do a game together. Truth be told, I haven't been playing it as much in 2020 just because I was so busy writing Spacetime 2 and all these other things. But usually in between books, like when I'm finally have like a tiny little window, that's when I'll like get into it.
Yeah, I think everyone needs one of those just ways to zone out and just to have a bit of fun. Mine at the minute, for some reason, I don't know if you're familiar with the game Rocket League. That's mine.
I've heard of it. That's
cars playing football.
Soccer one, right?
Yes. Oh, yeah, soccer, of course.
Actually, it's funny. My last roommate, when I was a couple of years ago, I had a roommate I was living with, and he had a PS4, and he at it every day with that game. And at first, I was like, "What is this?" But then, as I watched him, I'm like, "Oh, this actually looks kind of cool."
Yeah, I don't know what it is. It's repetitive, but it's a lot of fun.
I was terrible at Rocket League, just FYI.
Fair enough. We can stick with Worms. Have a go on that. I dipped out of Worms at around the 3D mode. When they started bringing in 3D, I was like, I'm checking out. Like,
that was a mistake. They went back to 2D after that.
Well, that's good. That's much better. Might have to give that a go. But we are obviously here to talk about you and all your writing and all your books and how you tick as an author. Start by telling my audience a little bit about how you got into writing and what got you to where you are today.
Yeah, so good question. I've been writing, like you mentioned earlier, I've been writing since 7th grade.
For reference, what is that in UK? How old are you in 7th grade?
UK, that's like when you turn 13 years old. 7th grade is that weird year, man. It's like that year where you've truly broken away from your childhood years. You've broken away from, Nickelodeon and Power Rangers and all that stuff. But at the same time, you're not quite at that mature stage yet where you're like learning more about who you are as a person and what you want your future to be like. 7th grade is kind of like purgatory in a lot of ways. It was my least favorite year, by the way. I hated 7th grade.
We might come back to that.
But during that time, I had this creativity itch that, had always kind of been there. And, I knew that I was not the kind of person who was, because I was like making video games as a kid, little, boring video games that didn't have much substance to them. But I realized I kind of wanted to do something more. And writing, I think, was, of all the mediums, the one that allowed me to, show the most creativity. It really opened up it really opened up the horizon, I guess you could say.
And what was it specifically? Is there anything you can nail it down to in terms of what made writing that cool for you? Because obviously there are many avenues you can go. You've got art, you've got music, you've got all these different ways, but writing seemed to be the calling.
Well, believe it or not, I actually did music as well.
Nice.
I was in a band, and I was a lead singer, and I actually can play guitar. I have one sitting right over there. But for me, I think writing ultimately, it's like writing. Sorry, my voice is a little hoarse at the moment.
That's fine.
Writing is what allows you to travel the universe. Writing is what, think about it like this. It takes 8 minutes for the sun, or it takes 8 minutes for sunlight to reach the earth. In the world of writing, you're already there. In the world of writing, you're already across the universe. You're already at places that are physically impossible to reach. And the thing I love about writing is that there's really no limits to the things you can accomplish. I know that sounds a little bit cliche, and I'm sure you've heard that one before, but it's the truth, I think.
Absolutely. And obviously you plunged into sci-fi. Was that where you began, or was it sort of a slow transition into getting into the world of writing sci-fi?
Truth be told, I was a little more fantasy when I first started. I was, writing about like these creatures who had magic powers, who lived inside like what's called subspace. And, it was really fantastical stuff that I feel like today doesn't really, today I think my writing's a little bit more grounded in science. Not to say there's anything wrong with fantasy, but I think at the time when I was young and figuring this stuff out, I think especially the fact that I grew up in Florida and I was very heavily exposed to NASA, very heavily exposed to watching the spacecraft take off. Like every time there was a launch, you could see it right from my back yard. And NASA was 4 hours away, but I could still see this stuff. And I just think that really played a huge role in driving me in that direction.
So was there a specific launch event? Was there anything in which fueled that first dive into sci-fi for you? Because it is a bit of a jump to go from, and it's a journey that I've taken as well. When I first started, a lot of what I was writing was fantasy, and that's stuff that will never see the light of day. And when I started to go into my first big projects, it was a fantasy series that I had in my head, and I was so ready to write it. And I tried about 5 or 6 different times, and then just switched into horror, went a little bit into sort of fantasy horror, but now a lot more of my horror, my readers will probably argue, but I like to think it's a little bit more grounded than probably where I came from. But it is quite a strong transition to go from here's a complete pretend world of things that will not never exist, but obviously it's not very likely they're going to exist, into something where you're sort of telling the hard truths. You're playing a lot more with sort of like facts and measurements and, the things that really exist in this realm. So how did that jump look for you?
Well, I'll tell you, for starters, I didn't really get serious about my writing until I got a little older. Because during high school, I had this whole idea, but at the same time, there was part of me that was like, didn't really understand what I was doing. Like I wrote down this big manuscript. It was kind of like in the world of software, they call it spaghetti code. This was like a spaghetti manuscript when you have all these ideas, but it's not very cohesive yet. And I think, I don't know, also I got severe ADHD, and as a kid, I was just distracted by so many other things. So I think as I got older, the writing bug would occasionally rear its head again, like it would come back at certain times. And by the time it came back, like really like came back, because I had manuscripts in high school that I was writing as well, but I feel like back then I didn't really have like a serious plot or like an idea of how to take these ideas and extrapolate them all the way out, into like a finished product. And so I think as I got older and started understanding science better and started understanding the world better, I think that kind of pushed me in that progression. And also when I was in college and, looking through the telescopes at the U of A and, really understanding the universe a lot better, I think those sorts of things kind of grounded me more in that direction.
And it's definitely
just a little bit away from fantasy, a little bit more towards sci-fi. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's fine. And it's definitely it's one. So one of the things you said there that totally resonated is like how different writing feels, sort of particularly during college and high school years, as opposed to what it feels like when you're actually taking writing seriously. And for me, I can definitely feel and remember the moments in which I started really taking writing seriously and going, okay, let's knuckle down and do this. When was that moment for you? Because obviously, if I've got my facts right, in December last year, you published your first novel, which was a Spacetime Tale. It seems to be selling very, very well in its genres. I have been checking it out, and there's a moment in which you go from writing these pieces of where it's essentially sort of, I guess, raw expressionism and just playing with the form to going, okay, I'm going to take this seriously as a writer and I'm going to publish a book. What did that journey look like for you?
Well, I'll tell you, I had another book, and it was going to be called Marius, which was basically a book that takes place in a city under the ice sheets of Europa, on a city called Marius. Takes place 1,000 years in the future. This was a book that, I'm not kidding you, went to like 400 or 500 pages. The problem was half of it was like handwritten, the other half of it was just like typed out. This was like my first real big jump back towards writing, and I had all these incredible ideas for it. But again, the plot got kind of lost and got a little ahead of itself. I didn't, know what I was doing with it. I didn't like really consider how to edit it. So eventually it kind of just, I also was at the time trying to like, make a living for myself, trying to like, get like my grounding in the real world, as they say. I think what happened was after I moved to San Francisco, I started writing more and more, and I had these ideas for sci-fi books that would take some of those elements from Marius and apply them in a more, I think, I guess you could say a novel that was just better well written. And then I think 2016 is where things really kind of got to a head. Um, let's just say my career as a web developer was a complete failure. I was, I went to a boot camp. I learned how to code. I tried a few jobs, as a web developer. They failed. I acknowledged it. One day during this period, I went to a cafe here in San Francisco called the Revolution Cafe. It was a hot day during what we call our second summer. In autumn in San Francisco is when it gets really warm. So I'm sitting in this cafe, it's humid out, I'm drinking a few glasses of sangria, and I just started jotting down this whole, I guess you could say, outline of a potential book. And that book eventually grew and grew. And, I started writing out the outline of what I wanted it to look like. And then 3 years later, that became a Spacetime Tale.
Nice. That's a hell of an origin story. I love that.
No, sorry, I know that was a spiel.
No, I like it. I like the color of the cafe and just all the inception of it coming towards you. I also like it when writers use elements of past projects that haven't quite panned out how they wanted it to into future stuff, because I think it shows that journey of how nothing is ever really finished and nothing's ever really a failure. Because you talk then about your web developer career and how that failed. How did you face that failure? How did you overcome that and look at the next thing? Because obviously things like that sometimes they can really break people and stop people from moving forward. So what was it that kept you going?
I think what kept me going was, I think there were a number of things. I think the writing was one thing that definitely kept me going. Also, eventually I did, spoiler alert, I did land on my feet shortly after. I went back into project management, this time with some of the tech skills I learned. So, and this was at least a year or two before I eventually came to work at the company that I'm at now. So things, eventually sorted themselves out on that end. But at the same time, I think the writing played a huge role in that, because during this critical point in my life, I was like, what do I want to do with my future? And obviously writing is a huge part of that. But at the same time, in San Francisco, the rent ain't cheap. Gotta, be able to have something to pay the bills, as they say, while you're pursuing your creative passion. I did not expect at the time that Spacetime Tale was going to turn out the way it turned out. I will say that.
How so?
Well, for starters, the cover, well, not just the cover, but like, I didn't think it was going to, I thought it was going to be like, I find an agent, and if I'm lucky, I might get a publishing deal. I didn't actually think that I'd be publishing it myself, that I'd be getting a fan base of, 2,000 email subscribers, that I'd build my own website from scratch, that I'd do all these things, and then I'd be discussing a sequel shortly after. I honestly didn't, it's like, I think Tim Ferriss said it. It's like, you're trying to plot like the next 50 years or something, but you have a flashlight that can only see 10 feet ahead. So it kind of felt like that.
Yeah. I love I love that journey and the surprise of being able to find readers and bring them into your work. Because I think a lot of people underestimate how, I mean, easy is definitely the wrong word, but how that kind of fan base can very, very slowly build. And like you say, you originally started with the idea that this would be a published book, you get an agent, or the traditional route of taking publishing, and you've gone independent with it. How did you source all the information? How did you research what the independent journey would look like in order to publish that first book?
Absolutely. And that's a good question. I think what happened for me, it was all about understanding the genre. And I think in the sci-fi genre, as I started doing more and more research, what I came to realize was that most sci-fi readers, they, at least the ones that I've seen, they love Kindle books. They love, they're very heavy on ebook series. And the thing is, I took a look at this from, value proposition. What can a publisher offer me as an author versus what could I accomplish as an independent author? And I, came to realize that, no disrespect to the publishing industry by any means, but I also felt that given my space, what I'm trying to accomplish here, the readers who I'm trying to reach, I could just as well reach them with a well-executed independent campaign. I could build the website myself. I could, I know enough, at least from my tech background, to, put together an email list, put together some of the marketing tools that are needed. I also had some help along the way. I actually worked with Ricardo Fayette, who's at Reedsy.
Yes.
And he's been an incredible resource, learned a lot from working with him. I also think talking to other authors is incredibly helpful. Actually, no, it's not incredibly helpful. It is absolutely critical. Yeah, no, it's a necessity. I think understanding the genre played the biggest role of all, because once you understand the people you're trying to reach, I think how you market to them becomes a lot clearer.
And you definitely, I mean, on your website and your bio, you list a lot of your influences. You've got people like Isaac Asimov, you've got Stephen Baxter, you've got John Scalzi. I'm going to butcher the names, Nnedi Okorafor and Becky Chambers, to name a few. Why are these the people that you chose to follow? What is it about their work that's drawn you in and influenced you?
Yeah, so Nnedi Okorafor, she wrote God, I just knew the series off the top of my head. That happens to me sometimes. I'll forget things.
I'll find it. I'll pop it in the show notes.
He's written some incredible work that I really found inspiring, involving aliens and involving first contact. Becky Chambers is someone who I absolutely love. She's from the Bay Area. She wrote the Wayfarers series. So some of her books are very space opera heavy. It's about these people traveling the universe. It's reading her books, I think, were very inspiring, especially because she has a lot of inclusion with her characters. And then if you look at some of the others, Stephen Baxter was one that I read a lot as a kid. I'd go to the local Barnes and Noble, which was like 2-minute drive from my house. And every time I went into the sci-fi section, he was the one whose books always caught my eye. And I read some of his stuff, like the Manifold series. It was, one, depressing, two, way the hell out there in terms of some of the ideas he had. Like, you have like time, like these characters, they go through the entire loop of time, like trillions and trillions of years into the future, so far that they restart at the beginning. And then the same thing with space. And it shows like humans living 1 billion years into the future when humans have gone extinct. And again, very depressing stuff, but very like mind expanding type of stuff. And I think that definitely kind of got me into sci-fi quite a bit.
And you, so you write a lot about, or you've got a passion for space and aliens. You like, that seems to be where you base a lot of your sci-fi. And your latest book is set in 2081. How do you go about crafting a world in the future? What are some of the key touchstones that you go across when you're trying to write what hasn't yet been invented?
Absolutely. And I think that's a good question. I think trying to understand the future, I was trying to think of myself, what would be an interesting time period to show like where this book takes place. Originally, I thought about doing it in the 2060s or 2050s, but then part of me was like, you know what, that's too soon. Let's go towards a period where I'm going to be like either dead or close to death. I was born in 86, so 2080s, I thought to myself, this would be interesting because it's far enough into the future where you can't accurately predict what's going to happen, but like you could see what certain trends today will be like after they've been played out a good 60 years from now. And so I think 2080s, I think, seemed like a good zone as far as what I wanted to portray, because it's not so far removed from reality, but at the same time, it's far enough to where you can get a little more creative with some of the things you're trying to explain.
It's interesting, particularly when you read some of the sci-fi books that came out about 10 years ago and what they were predicting, obviously, like now to be like, and how quickly people can get things wrong. What are some of the things that maybe you're quite proud of from your book that you've invented, that you've put inside that may potentially not exist by the year 2081?
Well, that potentially might not exist by the year 2081. Well, I hope the part of South Florida being underwater doesn't happen.
Interesting. Okay.
Family lives there, and obviously I don't want that to happen. That'd be bad. But in the book, there is a scene that takes place in an underwater Miami, and they basically take over a skyscraper and do things to it to repurpose it for a different use. Without giving spoilers away, of course. But I think, things like the brain technology would be interesting. I think there will come a day when our minds are where computers, meld with our minds, and we're doing all sorts of things like living in dream world, like San Junipero from that Black Mirror episode. That may have had a little bit of inspiration in there. But I think things like that could eventually come around. One thing that I hope does not happen is that, as we get so interconnected with all these things, that we don't lose ourselves as humans. And that to me is one thing that I'm very cognizant of. And I really hope doesn't become the norm for us.
Yeah, it's I'm getting sort of really down the rabbit hole of just like overthinking of bits and things that I've watched lately. Just because within my genre, with horror, you can sort of go into the sci-fi realms and you can play around with it, but I tend to sort of stick up very much with contemporary where we are now. But it must be a completely different realm for sci-fi now, because again, if you go back 20, 30 years, so much of what exists now didn't exist, and the possibility of, altering people's bodies, looking at putting computers within people's minds, all that kind of stuff was just fiction. And now it's very much becoming a reality. So what are some of the things that you're paying attention to now within, the current political, technological climate that are influencing where your books are heading?
Well, man, that's a good question. I think within the political
you're starting to tickle my geek bone.
Well, I think when it comes to, the political, technological, I think one of the things that we're all paying attention to is just how kind of balkanized society's become lately, with how technology has become so, and I think technology has a huge part to do with it, because, look, especially here in the States, we've always been divided. We've always had disagreements on things. But I feel like with technology, we've been so funneled into these echo chambers that we can't even have honest discussions more about anything without becoming, monsters to everyone else. And I don't know. I feel like that's one part of it. But I also feel like I think just like the widening influence of technology, how it's, learning more and more about us. I think AI as one example. I think these are things that, while I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole of saying it's the end of the world and it's apocalyptic, I do think these are things we should be concerned about in the years to come.
I recently watched, I think I mentioned this on another podcast episode maybe, but I recently watched Unnatural Selection on Netflix, which
Oh, yeah.
if you've not seen it, it's a 4-part episode. It's a 4-episode series about biohacking and altering DNA and all the progressions that have made with that. And one thing that I took from that, which I found quite interesting, is you don't realize how far advanced science really has gotten, just generally across the world, because we obviously live in our bubbles of what we know, what we can access, what we can afford. And so much of the modern literature that's coming out, sort of barring obviously sci-fi, people are a lot more aware of that, but in every other genre there seems to be this 5, 10, 15-year delay in terms of, I'm only just reading about books that came out last year that mention people on Instagram or Twitter or social media as sort of themes. So it's interesting to try and see how long it's going to take for that to catch up and to see a lot more influence of what is currently science fact that's already been in science fiction coming into contemporary books.
I mean, heck, man, just look at the pandemic. I mean, gosh, all those authors I'm thinking of right now who predicted like worldwide doomsday pandemics and who predicted zombie apocalypse. I mean, I got to say, like, they were probably the closest to reality of anybody. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, maybe it's not a zombie apocalypse, but still.
Good time to be in an apocalypse. You make a point of featuring LGBTQ characters in your work. Tell us a little bit about why and how that looks for you.
Well, I think, speaking as an openly gay man myself, I think it's always important to include yourself, include, the background you came from. I think a lot of authors, sometimes just can't help it. It is a part of who you are. It is, always, it is always good to include representation in your books, I feel. At the same time, though, one of the things I find most fascinating about my fan base, and I've seen this with a lot of the people who've picked up Spacetime, who gave it incredible reviews. Not everybody, most of my readers are not LGBT. Many of them come from different parts of the world. I've had a lot of people who are in their 50s and 60s, who are heterosexual, who live in the United States, who've said very positive things about the books, who, might not always agree with me when it comes to certain things. I even had one guy, believe it or not, who refused to read Spacetime because he was not pleased with Starscraper and the lesbian protagonist. And he told me that, but then he still gave it a 5-star review on Goodreads.
Interesting.
Yeah, I know. That was interesting indeed. But, look, I think it's always good to try and open people's minds up. I think if I can be that kind of author who, is able to take people of different backgrounds and make them, be able to get along better or not be mortal enemies with each other, I think that is, that's a role I'm proud to take on. And, obviously, sci-fi isn't going to, a couple books aren't going to fix that. But at the same time, I think one of the things about writing, especially when it comes to science fiction or fantasy or, horror even, when people go to our books, it's to get away from a lot of the crazy of the real world. It is to kind of put themselves in a reality that is detached from actual reality. And one of the things I'm trying to do as an author is try to, entertain people, give them a story they'll enjoy, but at the same time, maybe open their minds up to certain things that they hadn't, understood or experienced in their own lives. So I think that's part of it.
And what would you say to someone, because I mean, I've had a couple of people on the podcast who actively and trying to think of the right word would be, but they write the LGBTQ plus characters within the books. And one thing that I still struggle with, because I don't have a lot of that representation in my books, and it's something that I definitely want to rectify, because I'm a massive proponent of, writing everyone, and sort of the whole point for me of writing is to be able to experience life through other people's eyes, to open your mind, to sort of play around with your understanding of what the world is for other people. But one of the struggles I do have is trying to write in a way that's authentic and that won't offend people, because obviously there is an element of some people might not appreciate the way that I portray people of, that community, because I don't fit within that community. So what would you say to someone like me who is looking at not influencing, but adding more of that kind of content into his books, but it's just a little bit, in all honesty, nervous to start.
And you know what you just said, by the way, that's something I struggle with as well, because you know I'm a cisgender man, and you know if I wanted to put like I've you know lamented the fact that there's not a lot of trans representation in my books. And one of the things I've been thinking about as an author is exactly what you just mentioned yourself. And I think, you know, it's important whenever you're writing characters in a book, if they come from a background that's not your own, at the very least, I think you should educate yourself. You know, you should talk to people who come from those backgrounds. You should talk to people who have gone through those life experiences. And if you're going to go there, at least just, you know, be respectful. I think it's important also to make the characters very much a fabric of the book, rather than just, you know, throw them out there and be like, oh, look, we got a gay person here. Hooray. Like I've checked off this box. Like, I think it's important to, you know, write them in a way where they are part of the story with the other characters, not just like there for gimmicks and stuff, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. What kind of because you're that's fine. You obviously mentioned you get a lot of good reviews. Have you had any backlash, even, you know, in today, for any of those characters that you've written, or is it pretty much all positive across the board?
You know, no, with the exception of that one review that I got from that one guy. Well, sorry, his 5-star review, and then I'm not going to read Spacetime because blah blah blah. With the exception of that, I haven't really gotten any backlash. I did have people who didn't enjoy the book who said, I thought this was boring, or, you know, your technology is completely impossible. I mean, a space station that has gravity, like things like that. Like, most of the criticism that I've gotten so far have been the kind of across the board general criticisms that most sci-fi authors get. So knock on wood for that. Like, that I am thankful for. And at the same time, you know, like, I do have LGBT representation in my books, but that's not like the only thing that the books are about. You know, like, the books are about, you know, humans making first contact with aliens, and in a future where we know the aliens are out there, we just haven't spoken to them yet because we've seen them through telescopes. And I think I don't know, it's a sensitive subject. It's a fine line. Like, I don't have the answer for how we can best go forward and bridge those gaps, but it's a work in progress.
I think, like you say, the more that people just consciously contribute, and no matter how big, no matter how small, within their books, and sort of be more cognizant of how the world is around us, the more that slowly does just work its way into the zeitgeist. And I think part of it also, in your example, might even just be sometimes if you find the right tribe, if you find the right people that are reading your books, that understand you as an author, you as the journey that you're on, the content that you generally put out, that might be a factor in terms of just keeping that positive review and to keeping people on your side. How have you gone about recruiting your fans? How have you built that list?
Well, for me, twofold. Obviously, I've, you know, used a lot of Facebook ads, which I know a lot of authors are very heavily reliant on. Amazon ads have been a big one as well. But I would say, aside from the ads, I think, you know, reaching out to groups of people who are like, you know, I think reaching out to reading groups is a big one. And the biggest one, and one of the really big ones that I don't think we give enough credit to, is talking to other authors, just really trying to get immersed in the writing community, and trying to talk. And it doesn't always have to be sci-fi authors either. I mean, heck, I'm talking to you. You're a horror author, you know. But like, I think it's important to just try and reach those groups, and, you know, because one thing you'll realize as you advertise to people in sci-fi is I mean, it's a large audience, but at the same time, like, a lot of the people are pretty well connected to each other. Like, there's like, it's not hard to break into if you just put in the legwork.
Because there are a thousand subgenres of sci-fi. How do you find the way to market your book into the correct one?
You know, I mean, and that's a good question, because when I originally started Spacetime Tale, there are people who were saying this is military sci-fi. And I myself originally advertised a bit towards military sci-fi, but then as, the book started progressing, and then when I started writing the sequel, I came to realize this is more like the main character is a scientist. And while she is involved in this military organization that is putting together this mission that she's going to be a part of, there are no commanding officers in the book. There isn't like this general who's kind of like one of the main characters. It's not like reading someone like Ken Lizito or someone like gosh, I'm blanking on the name again. Who's Jasper T. Scott. It's not like they're great authors, and I do love their books, and I've read a lot of them, believe it or not. And I do read a lot of military sci-fi myself, but my book is kind of a bit different from that. And so I think with the sci-fi genre, it's like you pick your main one, which in my case is space opera, but you can also dip your feet into a few other like subgenres as well to like find like-minded audiences. So like you find your big one, but then create those linkages with some of the smaller groups.
And you mentioned a couple of times how critical just networking has been to you as an author in terms of building an audience, resourcing, and finding out the information that you need. Was that something that you expected in the beginning, or was that something that sort of the more you went on the journey, you became familiar with?
Oh, it was definitely more of a along the journey sort of deal, I would say.
And how would you go about, so say, for example, we've got someone listening to the podcast who's literally just today decided they wanted to be an author. What would be the advice that you'd give to them in terms of reaching out to other people, in terms of maybe etiquette, in terms of sort of the boundaries of respect and stuff? How would you advise them?
Well, I would tell them, I would say first things first, before you start reaching out to other people, focus on your own book first, try to, I would say the most important thing is, focus on your own work first, try to get it as good as you can get it, try to refine your style. And then when it comes time to reaching out to other people, I think it's always good to know who you're talking to. Don't just like go up to such and such author and say, hey, great work. Want to read mine? Like, I think it's always important, no matter which author you reach out to, show an interest in what they're doing, talk to them, like read some of their work before you reach out to them, like just at least show that you've done some of the homework first, because when another author comes up to you and says, hey, I loved reading a Spacetime Tale, or, I loved reading the series you did, I found it very compelling. I think that speaks a lot louder than, if you just hit somebody up and say, hey, you know what I mean? Like just know who you're talking to and just, educate yourself before you go into it.
Yeah, it's sound advice. And it's definitely something that a lot of people overlook. I get a lot of, hey, Damians. Damians, yeah. Get a lot of, hey, Damien, or hey, David.
Oh, God, that's just funny.
Yeah, people can't even get that right first time. But I also know from like experience, so when it comes to reaching out to those people initially, you may get a lot of silences and you may get a lot of people that don't reply. And for a lot of people, that can be quite disheartening. But the only advice I give there is you have to understand that people have their own lives to live, and they're very busy people, and they must get, hundreds of thousands of messages, of requests and everything a day. So don't let that be something that stops you taking that risk and reaching out. It just might not necessarily be that person's your contact.
No, completely agreed. And I've been through that, like I would say to the author or to the future authors who are listening to this, everything that Daniel just said, like I've experienced that where, you write to somebody and they don't respond, or they do respond. It's like, oh, hey, good luck, talk to them, like sort of like a casual wave off. And, look, it happens. It's going to happen to you. It's happened to us. But I think as, with experience, I think the more you slug away at this, the more that you write, the more that you put into your own work, people are going to recognize that. People are going to see what you've accomplished. And I think really that's the best advice I can give, is just keep at it, keep writing, keep, refining your ideas, keep building on them, because the more you build on your own stuff, the more you self-improve, the more credibility you're going to have when you reach out to others. And heck, maybe, some of them will start reaching out to you as you get better at your own stuff. I think.
Absolutely. Without a doubt. It's definitely the long tail. It's a long game, and just keeping your face in the community as well. I do find now, because I've been in the community since 2015, and I find now that a lot of the people I speak to are people whose names I just kept seeing pop up over the years, and you just subconsciously become more familiar with people, and you expect to see certain faces and names in the community. So that's always a good way just to tail in. Yeah, we are unfortunately coming up close to time. I have one more main question for you before we jump into some Patreon questions. And that question is the same question we ask people every single week, which is, why do you, J. Benjamin, write?
Why do I write? It's what I do. I love writing. It's my passion. And, it's like, why does a singer sing? Why does a painter paint? And I think for me, it's just at the core of who I am.
I'm going to add another one. I'm going to add another question. What's next for you? Like you say, you're working currently on the sequel to Spacetime Tale.
So I recently turned in the manuscript for Spacetime 2, which is going to be called The Celestial Minds. That's the official title of the book. I've turned it in to my editor. I'm preparing to release it by February at the latest. And so The Celestial Minds is coming out soon. And as soon as The Celestial Minds is finished, I'm going to get to work on book 3, which also has a name. It's called The Galactic Scourge. And so that one will be coming out in probably mid to later 2021. So I think finishing up the trilogy to Spacetime is my main goal. And then whether I create another trilogy after that, or whether I get started on this other series that I'm thinking of, those are the next steps.
Exciting. And let's get really meta here, because I believe this episode will probably launch around February time. So if it's out and if you're listening, then go and get your copy. Yes. And I'll pop a link in the show notes for people to grab that. Patreon questions. So we had one question from David Hines over at www.patreon.com/greatwritershare. And David says he has read that in sci-fi, the science needs to be accurate / believable. Is this essential, or can something just be made up, not fully explained, and still worked into the story?
Yeah, no, what David asked is probably one of the most existential questions in all of sci-fi. I think it needs to be relatively believable, yes. It doesn't have to be perfect. Like, you don't have to explain. I don't think you have to get deep into the weeds of explaining why a starship is able to open a wormhole and travel to another galaxy, but you should at least be able to give a little bit of background to kind of justify it. So I would say 75% believable. 25%.
Would we use the term pseudoscience? Or is that something different?
Pseudoscience is more like, I don't know. I don't know if pseudoscience is the proper term I would use, but I would say at least it needs to have some believability to it. So you need to be like, for instance, a wizard with a magic wand. Obviously that's fantasy when you see it on the surface, but if I could explain how that wizard's magic wand is really a tool that has a bunch of nanites in it, and they can manipulate the matter around them, well, I just turned that wizard. I just went along the path of turning that wizard into science fiction.
And now I've got an idea for a story. Okay, straight into our quick fire round now. So I have 10 questions. I'm going to throw at you as quickly as possible. It's all in good fun. You can pass at any point. Are you ready?
Go for it.
iRobot or Terminator?
iRobot.
Which shoe do you put on first, left or right?
Oh, left.
If you were sucked into a black hole with every author you loved and you could only save one person, who would be the one person you'd save?
Pass.
What are you currently reading?
What am I currently reading? I'm actually reading Not Alone 7 by Craig Faulkner.
Good choice. Do you own a telescope?
I do not own a telescope.
Tesla or NASA?
NASA.
What's your favorite beach?
My favorite beach, I would say it's Baker Beach here in San Francisco.
What's your dream holiday destination?
My dream holiday destination, I would say it's probably the Greek islands.
What's your favorite planet?
My favorite planet, definitely Saturn.
Chocolate or wine?
Wine.
And that's 10 questions. One bonus question is, where can my listeners find out everything about you and all that you're working on?
Yes. So jbenjamin.pub, which I know for you Brits, when you hear .pub, you probably think something different, but
It sounds glorious.
Yeah, so jbenjamin.pub. And if you subscribe on there, you'll get my emails regularly. I'll tell you about my upcoming projects. You can also, if you subscribe, get access to Starscraper, the free prequel to Spacetime Tale. It's a 70-page free prequel, gives you kind of like an idea of what to expect in the series. Yeah, so that's where to go. You can also join my Facebook page, Jay Benjamin.
Beautiful. And I'll put all the links for that in the show notes for anyone who wants to go over and grab all that good stuff. Jay, thanks so much for coming on the show and giving us all your wisdom on sci-fi. It's been a blast.
I appreciate it. Alrighty. I'll see you around. Thank you.
No worries. And thank you everyone for listening, and we will see you next week. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Great Writers Share podcast. Join us next week when Holly will be speaking with Mark Watson. Don't forget you can get early access to every episode of the Great Writers Share podcast and the chance to ask upcoming guests any of your questions just by becoming a patron of the show. All you need to do is visit www.patreon.com/Great Writers Share to support the show for as little as $1 a month. One more time, that's www.patreon.com/Great Writers Share. Until next time.